So, welcome to everybody. This is Cardinal Mazzarino Italian Geopolitics channel. Today we will have episode 3 of our streaming with some new guests. And we are changing a little bit the format because every episode we are trying to improve. This episode we will have main speaker that is Hilde Restad from Norway. That was my teacher 10 years ago in the international summer school in international politics. After the speech, we will collect during the speech some questions. So if you want to ask anything about US foreign politics, NATO, or whatever, Hilde will answer at the end of her speech. And after the question and answer fast for the first speech session, we will do a panel with multiple YouTube channel presenters. We have here already Alex from History Legends. We will have DPA, Defense Politics Asia, that will arrive soon. Military Summary. There is a lot of people that is coming through. So just to start, so Defense Politics Asia is just arrived. So tick. Okay.
Hi.
So from Singapore with love. So I will give like the stand to Hilde to start. So Hilde, you can.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Stefano, for inviting me. And it was a pleasure to be your teacher 10 years ago.
Okay. Thank you.
Now, I'm going to just speak not very long at all because Stefano told me that last time there were a lot of questions, and discussion is usually more fun than just listening to someone lecture. Although lecturing is my job I work at the Oslo New University College. It's a private college here in Oslo, Norway, and I teach American foreign policy and security policy. What I usually focus on in my research is actually the sort of domestic factors that affect U.S. foreign policy. So what's happening inside the U.S. and how that affects U.S. foreign policy. But I'll talk a little bit about NATO and a little bit about Finland and Sweden possibly joining NATO, because that is what Stefano wanted me to talk about. But any questions about the United States and political direction will be appreciated. Okay, so I just wanted to start by saying, when we talk about NATO, I think many people maybe assume that NATO was an American idea or invention, but it wasn't. It was a European idea in 1948 as the Cold War was heating up. Lots of European countries were becoming worried about the Soviet Union, and it was actually France and Great Britain, I think it was Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, the great power of Luxembourg, that went together and founded something called the Brussels Pact. And that was without the US or anything. But of course, if you're tiny European countries and you're looking at the big Soviet behemoth, you would really like the US to be on your team. And because lots of things happened in the lead up to the Cold War, so the Soviet Union was developing a nuclear weapon, for example, lots of things that made the US really nervous. The US did join what then became NATO in 1949. And at that point, as I'm sure Stefano knows, Italy was also a founding member. Norway was a founding member. And since then, it's grown from 12 to 30 countries throughout this time. And throughout this time, there have been lots of difficulties and disagreements and discussions between the members. For example, when, I don't know if you guys have heard of a guy, he's pretty obscure, called Donald Trump. But he was very critical of NATO and very critical of what European members were spending, or rather not spending, on defense. But when Trump was saying that, he was actually saying something that many American presidents before him has been saying, which is that the US spends all this money on defense spending and therefore military capability that can be used, for example, by NATO. European members have spent in proportion less than the US, while being able to, for example, develop very good welfare states So sort of to a certain extent free riding on American defense spending. And that has been a discussion and a problem, especially after the Cold War ended, when there was in the 90s a lot of discussion about, well, what's the point of NATO anyway? The Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. Do we need to have NATO? Should we be spending money on NATO? And so there has been sort of lots of discussions and disagreements within the alliance. And that was true also before Donald Trump. But of course, something else that happened in the 90s after the Cold War was that NATO started, in rather than sort of ending itself and saying, okay, the Cold War is over, there's no reason for us to exist, NATO became much bigger, right? And something that has been discussed a lot in conjunction with the war against Ukraine, of course, is NATO expansion eastward. And here, it's been interesting to follow that debate because you see a sort of a pretty heated debate. Since I'm following the debate in the US, I'll talk about the debate in the US between people who call themselves realists, especially academics who adhere to international relations theory called realism, which is about how power and power politics and relative power between countries affects their acts on the international stage, which have been very critical of NATO expansion eastward, blaming the US, which has been, the US has been, the Clinton administration, the Bush administration, they've all been pro Eastern expansion. But these sort of realists have been very critical of this, saying that this is only going to antagonize Russia and it will create trouble down the line. And when Russia invaded the Ukraine in February, of course, these people said, well, we were proven right. The reason that Russia decided to invade the Ukraine is because NATO has been pushing eastward and is threatening Russia. Now, a completely opposite view of that, which is a much more representative view of how American politicians think and how, for instance, President Biden thinks, is what I would call the group of liberal internationalists, those who are interested in the kind of international order that the US has been promoting, that NATO is a part of, which they see as a liberal order, valuing democracy, liberal institutions, multilateralism, that kind of thing. And that view, which I think is more representative of the official American view, is that NATO expanding eastward under the leadership of the United States can't be a threat to Russia because we would never invade Russia. It's a defensive alliance. It's not meant offensively. And the reason it has expanded eastward is not because the US has been forcing countries to join, but rather because these Eastern European countries, many of whom were former Soviet Union members, really, really wanted to join NATO. And that has been an interesting debate to follow because it links onto how the United States views itself and its role in Europe and in NATO vis-a-vis Russia, but also vis-a-vis these smaller countries. And one of the things that has been really interesting to follow is the debate on the American left, on the left wing of American politics, because left-wingers in general, and you've seen this in the European debate as well, are often very critical of American power and American hegemony in the world and its role and how it uses its power. And they've been sort of talking about this story about how the US has been pushing NATO eastward, and that therefore the US has some responsibility for what's going on in the Ukraine. But then you have people on the left in countries like Poland or other Eastern European NATO states who are saying, you guys are not taking into account our own, like these small states, and our wish and our right to be free and choose our own foreign policy. And we chose to be members of NATO precisely because we were worried that what Russia is doing to the Ukraine, they were going to do to us. So this is all debates that I'm following, both inside and outside the US. But certainly, I think, given, I mentioned Trump earlier, given where NATO and the Western alliance was only 4 years ago, when Trump was saying that maybe the US shouldn't even be a member of NATO. That was new. That was very new. No other US president had ever said that. NATO and the Western alliance really seemed to be, it was going really, really poorly. And lots of countries in Europe, NATO members, were very, very worried about what would happen to the alliance if they can't really count on the US anymore. But of course, what we see is that the Russian invasion of the Ukraine has really, really galvanized the Western alliance. And it has really sort of given a sort of unlikely boost of unity to NATO and the relationship between the US and its European allies at a time when everyone thought it was sort of teetering on the brink of not maybe working anymore. So ironically, one of the consequences of Putin invading the Ukraine is that NATO seems to be much stronger and much more united, and the US commitment to NATO seems to be much more stronger and bipartisan, it is worth mentioning, than one might have thought only a few years ago. And of course, the latest example of this sort of strengthening of NATO in Europe is the fact that it might now get to new members who were thought as entirely unlikely to join NATO. So I said that NATO's membership has increased from 12 to 30 countries since 1949, and the last one was North Macedonia, I believe. But now Finland and Sweden have said that they want to join NATO. And that, if you don't know the sort of the histories of Finland and Sweden, maybe that doesn't sound all that shocking, but Sweden has been very, very proud of its security policy of neutrality for about 200 years. It has sort of really, it has become almost an identity in Swedish security politics that Sweden is neutral and will not take sides. And that has changed completely, along with, of course, the other country, Finland, which has had has sort of balanced a real tightrope during the Cold War in trying not to antagonize its very powerful neighbor to the east, the Soviet Union, now Russia, and not having wanted to antagonize Russia and having wanted to stay neutral and not do anything that might piss Russia off. So the fact that Finland and Sweden now have applied for membership in NATO is really it's sort of huge. It's huge news. It's hugely significant for those countries, for the security history in Europe, and for the US and their relationship with NATO. And of course, I'm from Norway, and Norway calls itself NATO in the North and has been sort of promoting itself as the guardian of the Arctic and the High North in the NATO alliance. Now, with Finland and Sweden becoming members of NATO, you suddenly get two more NATOs in the North, and you get a much stronger military presence in the Arctic region and also, of course, in the Baltic Sea, which really changes the sort of the security politics map of Europe with NATO versus Russia, which is really, really interesting and hugely significant. And it was interesting that when Finland and Sweden announced this, I think people were very worried about what Putin would say or what Russia might do, because many people had said after Russia invaded the Ukraine that it did so because the Ukraine was interested in joining NATO. But we haven't really seen any kind of reaction from Putin and Russia in the way that one might have thought if NATO membership was really the issue. So of course, this made many people say that this was NATO expansion eastward was a convenient excuse for Putin to invade Ukraine, but it was not what it was really about. But in any case, if the war in the Ukraine has ironically strengthened NATO and brought the US in closer to European security politics, it is interesting to also look ahead, because that's right now. And right now there's this war in the Ukraine in the middle of Europe that is really binding everyone together. But of course, if you look ahead, there are other challenges to the alliance on the horizon. And NATO members just met in Madrid to develop what's called a new strategic concept, which is to guide the alliance in the next 10 years. The last one was from 2010. That concept from 2010 did not mention China at all, but the new strategic concept prominently features China as they call it something that challenges our interests, our security, and our values. It's very specific about the threat to the alliance posed by China's military buildup, its cyber and disinformation capabilities, its presence in Europe through its Belt and Road Initiative, and some of European countries' dependence on China economically. But of course, for the European countries, the point of NATO is to counter Russia in Europe. China is all the way in Eastern Asia, and one could imagine a scenario in the future where the US will be much less involved in European security on behalf of NATO and much more involved in the Pacific region, or the Indo-Pacific as they're now calling it. And so that you get a sort of differing focuses among different allies in NATO, which would, if that is going to work, mean that the European NATO members, such as Italy and Norway, will have to spend more money on defense in order to safeguard the European theater if the US is involved elsewhere. So, I also want to point out one thing about NATO and the US commitment to NATO, which is that I think Americans in general are not very focused on foreign policy. That's sort of always true unless there's something that really focuses their mind. And they don't necessarily have any specific or strong or fixed opinions on things as specific as, for example, NATO. But when these things happen, when Russia invades Ukraine, you'll see that in polling, support for things like NATO will go up. But what's also, I think, important to recognize is that there are not a lot of things that Republicans and Democrats agree on in Congress these days, but there is bipartisan support for U.S. membership in NATO, for strong U.S. support of its allies and non-allies like Ukraine. And even though you can see that the Biden administration is having a really hard time getting really anything through Congress, there's not going to be a problem to get the Senate, which is the body that would ratify the new members into NATO, because the Senate is the body in the US government that ratifies treaties. You would not have a problem getting enough Republicans to vote yes for Sweden and Finland, which I think is notable. In an otherwise very divided Congress that you can't get Republicans to vote for anything that Democrats want them to vote for, this does not seem to be all that controversial, which I think is very interesting. But of course, what the US thinks about NATO might change, again, depending on who becomes president in 2024. And that is a problem, because that means that you, as European allies, don't really know what lays ahead for the United States in terms of who they elect as their president and what that president might think about NATO. But I think I'll leave it there so that there's time for some discussion and questions.
Okay, so I received a lot of questions for you, Hilde. So let's start. So we will put some question on the stand, and if you want to make any question directed to Hilde, do it now. After this session, we will do a question and answer about the situation in Ukraine. So if you have anything that is specifically about war in Ukraine or whatever, we will do it later. So for now, only question about US foreign policy, NATO, Scandinavian countries, and whatever. So let's start from one that is a little bit critical question by Andrei Popescu. Can you tell Hilde one example when NATO defended itself And why does NATO act like an offensive alliance since the intervention happened on other sovereign countries that are not part of NATO?
Well, NATO is a defensive alliance, which means it doesn't go to war against other countries. It will defend itself if other countries goes to war against it. So, for example, the attack on 9/11 on the United States was an attack that was launched from Afghanistan. And so the NATO countries invoked Article 5 and said an attack on one is an attack of all. And the war against Afghanistan was launched, which was recognized in general as defending against an attack. So there, in international law, there's a very big difference between starting a war and defending against an attack. And so the war in Afghanistan, although that is not a comment on how it developed and what happened later, the initial invasion of Afghanistan was defending oneself after an attack had been made, so not the first mover. I think similarly in the Yugoslavian civil wars, NATO didn't start that war. It was intervening on behalf of groups that were being slaughtered. If the questioner is thinking about Iraq, I think it's important to remember that that was not a NATO war. It was a US war. And I recognize that the US is very powerful in NATO, but NATO and the US are not the same thing.
Okay, next question. It's about SSSR. So, could be explained why former Soviet state didn't keep close tie with Russia after the collapse? Did Russian collusion happen into the internal affair of those former Soviet states, and what extent?
Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, which I think it's a great question. Why wouldn't the former Soviet states want to redefine their relationship with Russia and come up with maybe a new way of being together after the Cold War? And you could certainly see that scenario play out. But as we have seen, pretty much all of the former Soviet states, except for Russia, don't want to be in a relationship with Russia that entails Russian domination. So I think what these Eastern European countries that became members of NATO, like the Baltic countries, like Poland, what they have been saying is that they want to be able to choose their own foreign policy. They want to be able to choose their own economic policy. They want to be able to join the EU. They want to be able to join NATO because they fear Russian dominance and influence. And there have certainly been many instances of Russian cyber warfare and hacking of Eastern European countries and up throughout the years. So if I understand the question correctly, my answer would be, I think it is important to recognize that these Eastern European countries, having been in the Soviet Union for decades in the 20th century, when given the chance, opted to not be in a close relationship with Russia because they didn't feel like that gave them the freedom that they wanted. And that isn't Western propaganda. That's what the Eastern European countries themselves are saying.
Okay.
Could it be a kind of a romanticism of the West? Like, the Eastern European countries, the Eastern Europeans, they have this like romantic notion of how the West is, and it's like, and also because of they just want to get away from their Soviet history, and which is why they have this very pro-West approach of wanting to move closer to the West. Despite that, actually, is also another domination. It's actually American domination, but it's just not so obvious as per what they experienced in the with the Soviet Union, where Russia is actually the biggest state within the Soviet Union, and their dominance is like unavoidable of sorts. Is that romanticism like we are seeing in Western Ukraine, where they are really in love with the West, while the Eastern Ukraine are just like we just want to be us.
Yeah, I don't know if romanticism is the right word, because it's, of course, evaluations of pros and cons. What can the EU provide you? What can NATO provide you versus what can being a closer ally with Russia provide you? What is it that you want for yourself and your country? And in that sense, it's been a truly damning judgment over the old Soviet Union, that almost all of their members wanted to be a part of the European Union and NATO rather than stay in the orbit of Russia. And of course, if any of these countries that became a member of EU wanted to leave, they could. We've seen that Great Britain has left the European Union, right? So it's not like nobody's forcing them to stay, which is also a difference between East and West, as we've seen. So I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there was a romanticization of sort of what the West is, but Eastern European countries have gotten to try it for the last 20 years. There's a fly in my office. For the last 20 years, and they seem to be pretty happy with it. Some countries are not as happy with it. Some countries are very critical, like Hungary, which in their characterizations of the West and the EU, they sound a lot more like Russia and Putin than they do like a country that's actually a member of the EU and NATO. So it's not a completely black and white picture, but it seems like most of the countries are pretty happy with their choice. And certainly you see now the countries that are in NATO are extremely happy that they are in NATO and not just NATO adjacent like the Ukraine.
Okay, so I have another question that is like technically about NATO, but it's something that we repeat to receive about NATO intervention. Like one, it's about can you answer why intervention aren't considered aggressions? And another one that I'd only like to put the same things is about the same thing about Yugoslavia. So it's about 1999 intervention in the Yugoslavian civil war.
Sure. So in international law, there's all these different categories of things that make them legal or illegal. So you're not only after 1945, after the UN was set up, technically the only time it's legal in international law to use military force against another country is if the Security Council has said that it's okay, which usually concerns defending yourself against another country's aggression. So once another country has used military force against you for a non-okay reason, you are allowed to respond. So that's what happened in Afghanistan. The intervention in Iraq in 2003 was illegal in international law. That was a war of aggression that the US executed. So that will put that in the illegitimate pile. The civil war in Yugoslavia is a bit more complicated. The Security Council was immobilized because Russia was on the side of Serbia. And the Western members were on the side of the people being slaughtered by Serbia. And so you didn't get a Security Council resolution. So NATO decided to intervene in order to stop the genocide and the slaughtering. But it wasn't because, Serbia wasn't threatening the US or any Western European countries, but it was a sort of seen as a humanitarian intervention in different stages, because you have the early stages that ends up with the Dayton Accords, but then you also have the 1999 bombing, right, which ended the war finally. So it's a bit more complicated in terms of international law and in terms of who did what. But I think it is worth noting that the Yugoslavian war, the intervention that NATO did, was in order to stop atrocities, not to start atrocities, which I think, again, we're seeing with Russia and the Ukraine, that there is a difference in how the sides are using their military force and who they are targeting.
But I think the Russians also use the exact same concept of because they are accusing of Ukraine is bombarding and torturing or whatever on the Donbas people, and then that's the exact same reasoning why they have to intervene.
They're using the same language a lot.
But is it
that's something you're seeing in Russia? No, it's obviously not the same. It's clearly not the same. And using military force to change internationally recognized borders is illegal in international law. So the minute that Russian tanks crossed the border, they were breaking international law.
Then the fracturing of Yugoslavia, then what is that breaking up of the international agreed borders? Because I personally, I'm not from Europe. It does, very confusing for someone so far away. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it's like, why this is okay and this is not okay, although they look exactly the same.
Yeah. Well, it's there are different levels of analysis. One is the level of international law, and anything that isn't authorized by the UN Security Council is technically illegal in international law. It could still be ethically right or morally right, but technically illegal in international law, or it could be both illegal and immoral. Do you see? So there are different levels. What's a just war? What's not a just war? And you can see a lot of countries will use the same kind of rhetoric and the same kinds of justifications, but it doesn't mean that what they're doing is the same thing, or that it's equally ethical.
So I will put the last two questions, and then if there is any question from the panelists, I will give to them the word to make some questions. So this is from Ritra. Question is about the chance to create a new soft iron curtain over Europe, like the Cold War, the result of this war.
Yeah.
Your opinion?
That's a great question, because of course originally the Iron Curtain was a sort of a metaphor for the Soviet Union and where it met Western Europe, where you couldn't cross the borders, and they built a wall that separated East Berlin from West Berlin. So it was both a physical and a symbolic Iron Curtain. And I guess if the sanctions stay, right now it's really hard for people to enter and leave Russia, going to and from countries that have sanctioned Russia, for example, which is a kind of repeat of the Iron Curtain again, in terms of you can't move these people here and there or where they want to go, and that would be, of course, incredibly sad. I'm from Northern Norway, and Northern Norway has a lot of Russians who live or who travel or who work for business. And one of the wonderful things about the end of the Cold War was that the border between Northern Norway and Russia became much more open, and people could flow back and forth, which is usually quite helpful for cultural understanding, for diplomacy, for all of these things. And it would be very sad if the result of this is that it would be much harder for people and governments to have contact with each other, which I guess would be Russia, Belarus, and whatever part of Ukraine Russia takes for itself. But that might very well happen, but it would be very regrettable.
I received many questions, but I will synthesize at the end with the last one, which is the most specific question. It's about if any case of NATO member attacks Russia, like the case of the problem about Kaliningrad. It is now. It could be called like Article 5, or when if Russia declares wars and invades this country, the NATO will intervene with Article 5.
Okay, so Article 5 is really interesting because the European members wanted the security guarantee to be automatic, but the US was concerned about being dragged into wars. And so Article 5 is a bit more nuanced than many people think. Article 5 does say that an attack on one is an attack on all, so sort of like the Three Musketeers principle. But then it goes on to say, and then it's up to each member to go through their own constitutional processes to figure out how to appropriately respond. So the US would have to engage the Senate and get the Senate to agree to what they would do. Which means that if other NATO countries think that one NATO country, say Lithuania, illegitimately attacked Russia, then they would be under no obligation to enter into that war. And so there is more nuance and flexibility in Article 5 than maybe many people think, which might be a good thing. And if Lithuania attacks Russia without Russia having done anything to provoke an attack, then Lithuania's attack is illegal in international law anyway, and shouldn't be supported by NATO.
Okay. There is a lot of question about, it's the same type of question because of the people is telling about, let's say the war that had like such a kind of intervention directly of NATO or indirectly US and like the volunteer alliance like in Iraq or whatever. Yeah. It's about the difference between like, let's say, the Russian intervention in Donbass and, for example, the intervention in Libya or in Iraq or whatever. What's like legal by the international law, the difference between these
it is really complicated. And the way that the world was set up after World War II is, again, that the UN Security Council gets to decide what's legal and illegal. And ironically, the intervention in Libya, which has been, after it happened, widely criticized, and everyone seems to agree it was a terrible idea. At the time, it was sanctioned by the UN Security Council. Russia and China said, okay, and NATO conducted the operation. So it was maybe the most legal operation in the history after World War II, but it doesn't mean that it was a smart idea or that it went well. Or, you know, all of these things. But the actual decision to intervene in Libya was thoroughly legitimate per international law because the UN Security Council sanctioned it, and then NATO conducted the air operations. And that was not something that the US was really pushing for. President Obama was very skeptical of this. But France and Britain especially were pushing really hard for this.
Yes, I agree, but I think France, because the main, to explain by the Italian point of view, let's say that Gaddafi, we said that, not me, but a famous politician say Gaddafi was a bastard, but was our bastard. So let's say, so the main thing, if you can check like the situation about the oil contracts in Libya, mainly before the war was Italians, about Eni. Now you can check there is a lot of Total, France. So I think that in that case, it was a war very, very suggested by Sarkozy at time. And the US, I remember, was not very interested in starting this, but mainly forced. And okay, if Alex wanted to make a question, because before I saw it.
Very interesting presentation, but I have a question. What do you do about the countries that don't recognize the international borders or this status quo that was built up after World War II? I think most of the wars we see nowadays is countries that have been some sort of formed by the West and that do not agree with these borders simply because like in Africa or in the Middle East, a lot of the countries are not ethnically bound together. In Europe, there is some sort of peace because whether we like it or not, the countries are ethnically bounded. But this is not the case in Africa. This is not the case in a lot of countries around the world, in the Middle East. So what do you do about international law, about these countries that don't recognize the international borders?
Yeah. It's not easy. And it's not only the West. I think the Soviet Union was a big player in setting up the world after World War II, including, you know, Stalin and Churchill deciding where the borders went in Europe, right? So great powers carving up the world and drawing borders that's the result of that we are living in today, and it's not unproblematic at all. And that, you know, big part of the late 20th century was about the decolonization, you know, getting rid of imperial powers, having your own countries, but maybe then countries whose borders weren't drawn the way you would have wanted them to be drawn, right? So we're all living in the world that is a consequence of all of these layers of imperial powers and wars deciding where these lines are drawn. So yes, you're right. There's the principle against changing borders by force, which is a good principle, I think, because if you don't have it, you can have mayhem. On the other hand, the lines on the map aren't necessarily the right lines, and this is a paradox for sure.
So where do we go with international law with things like that? If a country says they want to reunite with their brothers, whatever they call it, on the other side of the border, and they want them to be together, it has happened a lot in Africa or even in the Middle East again. Is there some legitimacy in such actions?
Well, unless you want actual mayhem, I think you have to sort of start with the states that you have and see if you can represent the people in those states in any way. Of course, if with the Eastern Ukraine issue, Russia held a referendum in Crimea that I think is, you want to make sure that these results are actually representative, that they are done in a good way, which of course you can ask some questions about. The have a fake referendum, then quickly intervene because you say you got a majority in the referendum with military force is perhaps not the most fruitful and way to go. Again and again, what happens in these situations is that civilians are the people that suffer, and that peace is broken and people die and innocent people die. So whatever strategy can avoid that, I think would be the better strategy for sure.
But that means that for example, if one country has one part that wants to secede, they have to some sort of allow them to have their voice, like in a referendum or something. Because, for example, in Canada, there was this issue with Quebec. With Quebec, there were 2 times referendums. The second time, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but the second time Quebec wanted to be independent, the result were 49.6% yes, and the slight majority, it was 30,000 people difference, all right? But Canada still allowed Quebec to express their wish to be independent. However, most countries fear this and simply reject this. So I don't know if the government in Kiev would have allowed Crimea, for example, to have this vote for autonomy anyway, or even if the vote came out, would they have accepted it? I don't know. It's just questions.
Yeah, and you see, this has been a really decades-long problem in Spain, for example, with the Basque Country, and there are lots of countries that have these issues, and I don't think there's a quick fix to this. But the hope would be that the violent option is not the option that you take, because lots of innocent people are going to die.
If I can, Endeavor, I will give you the word. I will repropose another time. I said also in the other streams, there is an interesting case study in Italy that is like 2 provinces, that is Trentino Alto Adige, Südtirol in Germany, in German language. It's the same case of Donbass. If anybody is not familiar in it, it was like a former Austrian province before First World War. Was in Second World War, it was like it was between one part was part of Austrian-Hungarian Empire. For example, one of the founder of the Italian state was before a member of the parliament of Austrian-Hungarian Empire. Only for you to understand that the northeast of Italy is a mess. And the solution that we did also after the Second World War was that in the new constitution, that was in 1946 and 48, it was the time of the constitutional law, we gave 5 regions not the independence but the autonomy, and this autonomy was based about the language and different let's say similarities, not with Italian state. It's valid also because there is a big French community. Friuli Venezia Giulia because there is a big Slavic community. Sicily and Sardinia because they're Iceland and they're different languages and whatever. And in this case, it's interesting because it was under an UN directive. Trentino Alto Adige are 2 provinces that are like a region in Italy Northeast. and in Trentino they speak mainly Italian. In Alto Adige, Südtirol, they speak German. And this autonomy, it's under the surveillance of Austria in the UN. So it was a huge amount of, let's say, terrorist attack during the 70s and the 60s. They mainly attacked, for example, electrical lines or trains or whatever, and they agreed in a complete autonomy. For example, they maintain all the taxes. They don't give the VAT to Rome. They have like German school, Ladin, that is a local language that is only in these provinces in the valley. And this solution, it was achieved with, let's say, not a war. So it's an example that it's a lot also for, as you said, Alex, before, we have a plenty of borders that are complicated in the Eastern Europe. If you check to Romanian border,
and Western Europe.
But Alsace-Lorraine, for example, in Germany or whatever. But if you say Istria and Dalmatia was Italy, if you check before the Second World War. But we are not like attacking Croatia and Slovenia because we want it back. There is a huge Italian community. If you go to the northern Romania, they are mainly Hungarian. There is no Romanian in in North Romania. If you check various cities like province of Salace or Cluj, Transylvania, it's mainly Hungarian. I think that one deal about autonomy and the chance of use your own languages, have dual citizenship or whatever, it's like it's something to prefer instead of war on field. But let's say, Alex, tell me.
But I think this is what the European Union is good for. This is what it manages, that by removing borders between certain countries, it kind of brought peace. For example, with Ireland, we saw that a lot of people from Northern Ireland that are Catholic, they could cross the border into the south whenever they wanted to see a football match, for example, and they could be connected to their brothers again to the south. And same thing for Tyrol. They could go to Austria whenever they wanted. And this openness allowed people to move freely, and they had more autonomy. It was easier for people to be related to the people across the border. I think the European Union kind of helped a lot of things like that. For example, Romania and Hungary. Hungarians in Romania are very close to the Hungarians in the homeland. Same thing for the Hungarians in Slovakia. It's very easy for them to move around and not feel constrained in one place.
Okay, Alex. Debruk, if you wanted to make one question, then we will say thanks to Hilde because she have another working meeting after 4. So if Debruk, you want to ask something, and then we will debate. For the people that is commenting, all the questions we will answer by the second group after 4 p.m. Debruk?
Actually, I just wanted to make a comment on Hilde and Alex's opinion. If you look at Sri Lanka, in northern Sri Lanka and eastern Sri Lanka, we have about 90%. The majority is Tamil ethnic people living. And if you look at India, on southern India also, it's the same ethnicity. But by boundaries, since decolonization, we have been splitted. There are relatives, there are friends, there are all connected people, but the travel and the borders have restricted it. If you look at it, India, it's the same. Pakistan and Bangladesh was created in decolonization. Same ethnicity over there, that is, both are Muslim countries, but the same families, but they are disconnected. They are not in a position to travel with these restrictions. Just wanted to make the comment, even though it is not the same case in Europe. It's a free movement, less issues. Just wanted to give my opinion on Asia, South Asia's situation, on Hilde and Alex's opinion.
Absolutely. Thank you, Debruk.
Okay, perfect. Hilde, I think if there is any other question, DPA or Alex, that you want to do any question to Hilde, or we will let her go.
I
Any
really
question?
appreciate it, guys. It was really fun to talk to you guys, and I really appreciate all the questions. And I do want to say before I leave that I think lots of people have difficulties keeping things separate in these discussions. And so keeping the US and NATO separate is one challenge that many people have. Also, saying that something that the US or NATO does, which is good, doesn't mean that everything that they do or have done is good, right? And so you need to be able to really keep your nuances and your complexities in these discussions. And I appreciated that you guys did that. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Hilde, so much for your time. So I hope that we meet you soon. So still thank you. And if anybody have any other question, post it also in the comments after that, and we will collect it for the next stream. So we will pass to the second part. Thank you, Hilde.
Thank you, Hilde.
So here we are. Only to make a small presentation for the viewers. I received a lot of questions. I tried to put all the questions that I was able to put for the commenters. I know that you are very passionate about this field. We are trying to catch the best streams and the best streamer in the market. You will see in the next, we will have others and others. Alex, we will have a stand in the next days only with his own presentation. So we will have a new world economy, military summary, war in Ukraine, for sure DPA, that is our best in Asia. But we will have also, I found also one speaker from Australia, two from Brazil, like to make as more as possible, more multicultural, multi-view, because as we agreed in the last time, nobody of us is biased. So everybody has this point of view, but there is not one truth. Everybody has his own truth, his point of view, but only mixing the other point of view, you can reach, let's say, one mix that could be as more as possible next to the truth. So question that is like for the panel. So let's go directly to Ukraine. I was waiting. This is for DPA and Alex for sure, and we will put some question. Then I will ask to Devruk a little bit if it can give us some news about Sri Lanka, because he's living from Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, there is a very complicated situation, and we will have like news live from the country. So about the newly provided HIMARS to Ukraine, plus the recent success to using them, UA will start to feel overconfident on maybe start to hit inside Russia. Can that cause unnecessary escalation? So DPA start, and then Alex, and then.
Yeah. So be prepared for some emotional damage if you support Ukraine. No. Okay, so they have like less than 10 HIMARS. I think maybe 6 now. I think 2 got destroyed. Of course, if you believe the Ukraine Defense Ministry, if you don't believe, then they have 8. Yeah. So however, they are just 8. I mean, the Russians have Iskander, Smerch. They got like all sort of a variety of missiles, and they are hitting Ukraine daily. Like multiple ammo depots get destroyed. Command centers, deployment points, like on a daily basis, like daily. So Ukrainian pro-Ukrainian guys are like celebrating on Twitter. Wow, they're hitting some ammo depots, and then they are like celebrating like as if they won the World Cup. These things are happening on a daily basis from the Russian point of view. So if the Russians have been hitting Ukraine for the past 130 over days, every day, with intensity of like at least 2-3 times of what the HIMARS can do, then and Ukraine are still not out of the picture, they're still fighting. Why would 6 or 8 HIMARS make a difference to the Russian war effort? So no, I always joke like these are like Gundams. It's like they are supposed to become some kind of magic weapons that they can win the war. I don't think so. It's not likely. But of course, the Russians are not taking these weapons lightly because they can still cause massive damage to the forces that are in the rear, and because they can go very far. So command posts or radars or all sort of military stuff. It could be also civilian infrastructures might be in danger, and it causes the Russians to be more paranoid. They have to be more careful. So and then the no amount of surface-to-air missiles is going to cover the entire front. So that's why there is an impact, but it's not as much as how the pro-Ukrainian Twitter accounts like to put it. But of course, you can disagree. You can disagree. I'm perfectly fine with that. You
Alex.
Yeah, I completely agree with Riyadh. And one thing that we also have to think about is how these HIMARS are replenished. So if there's no more missiles, it's the ammunition always. Like same thing for artillery when it comes to Ukraine or any machine, you need the ammunition. If the ammunition depots of Ukraine with the missiles are destroyed, there's no more missiles. But I think this thing about the HIMARS is also an American representation of how to solve a problem. When I was in university, I had a teacher from Atlanta, and he said that Americans love to solve problems with money and technology. And this is the only two options Americans usually find: adding more money to solve the problem or new technology. For them, technology is the way to always get out of a problem. For example, the way the United States moved west in its history with the railway or the atomic bomb, it's always technology to solve a problem. So now, for them, the best way to solve the problem in Ukraine is, again, technology, by sending a lot of equipment. However, we've seen that, historically speaking, it's not enough just to send equipment. We saw that after the Battle of Lysychansk, Ukrainians have left a lot of equipment behind. What says that in the next battle, you're not going to have some artillery left behind or some important equipment left behind? I think there's other problems in the Ukrainian army more than just equipment. And like we had said, it's only a handful of HIMARS. Of course, it's like the Bayraktar. I feel it's a bit like the Bayraktar, where they film some explosions and they say, oh, it's the end of the enemy army, but that's it. And 2 of them are already destroyed. So.
Okay, so let's move to the next question. We will put 2 questions when a little interview of Devruk, so he can update us about Sri Lanka. So Tom, the question of $1 million that we received every streams, about how much longer could be the conflict. If I can make let's say 1 little point of introduction, we have 4 different point of view in this. We have one from America, let's say Alex, from American continent, not from USA, from Canada, 2 from 2 from Asia, so Singapore and Sri Lanka. So I want also the answer of Devruk, because, and 1 from Europe, Southern Europe. It's very interesting to listen a little bit after this question, the point of Devruk, because the Sri Lanka, for me, it's very important in this geopolitical situation, because it's on the Silk Road. So everybody is watching about president problem, no fuel. Look where Sri Lanka is on the map. Devruk knows it very well. So it's interesting because I think that the focus of Ukraine will move fastly to Southeast Asia. And the problem is that, like also the media in Europe, it's a little bit taking the war with a little bit slow down the inertial phase. So at the beginning, a lot of news about it. Now it's already a little bit going down. So my forecast about the war, it's something that could be not in the average, but I think that you will see something like this. The main problem in the European field is Germany, because now you have to see that the two, Italy the second. Why? Because if you check the European production, it's mainly Italy and Germany. It's not France, it's not Spain. France is mainly rural, also Spain, and Eastern Europe, it's nothing. So check about the GDP and the production, it's Italy and Germany, and it's interconnected. If you see about German cars, most of the parts are made in Italy. It's not made in Germany. It's assembled in Germany. So you have to see that these two countries are completely interconnected, and they are the two countries with the most energivore industries. And we don't have nuclear power. So the main problem will be that the geopolitical position of Germany, it's complicated because it's completely dependent by Russia at the moment. If you check today, it's an interesting day because Nord Stream 1 it's stopped from today for 10 days, technically for maintenance. Technically, let's see in 10 days what will happen. So what we can do in Italy and Southern Europe, it's different because there is a lot of movement about new contracts with Libya, Algeria, and whatever. So we can reach the amount of gas that we need without Russia. Now we already decreased the dependence from 45% to 20%. For sure, it's more expensive at the beginning, but there is a huge amount of gas, for example, south of Greece and border between Greece and Turkey in the Mediterranean. In the north part of Egypt, it's full of gas, not yet, let's say, used or whatever. There is a huge amount of movement against around Israel. Check a lot of new contracts using Israel, and we have TAP, so we are directly connected with Azerbaijan, Baku, or whatever. Look at Germany. Germany has only connection with Russia, a little bit with Norway, a little bit with Scandinavian, UK, but this is the most problematic part. So my opinion is that the war will accelerate for sure this month during the summer, but I think that till the winter will arrive, there will be a lot of changement because Germany will push a lot Ukraine to make some deals. The last meeting that nobody checked why there was this meeting, the real reason. Draghi, Scholz, and Macron went to Zelensky not for make a chat. It was a discussion for the post-war for making a deal with Russia. This was the real reason, because the three main power of Europe can support Ukraine for reconstruction, but not for a let's say lifelong war, because it's not an advantage for nobody. Europe, still Russia. Think about Russia, and then I repeat to you, I'm not biased. I check the data. 60% of the GDP of Russia, it's oil and gas export. China will be able in 2025 to import 35 milliard cubic meters of gas. Europe is importing 155. So you can understand by yourself that if we stop tomorrow to import gas from Russia, China and India is not, let's say, a substitute. Immediately, the state will not be able to support this because the economy of Russia is very dependent by export of oil and gas products. So I think that a deal will be made, not soon, but I hope soon. So Wyatt and Alex, if you want to answer firstly to this question, I will pass the word to Devruk about Sri Lanka, and then we will pass to the next questions.
Yeah, I think this we probably will have some kind of negotiation between the West and Russia, maybe before winter, maybe after these 10 days of maintenance, because the maintenance will give everybody a wake up call.
And
because-
Wyatt, the problem of maintenance is Alex's fault because Canada was forcing to don't send the turbine back to Russia, so it's history.
but it's not on the way,
fault.
right? They already
So it's
released it to Siemens.
Yeah,
It's
very
now on
least,
the way to
very-
Germany, but I'm not
Yes.
sure what the Germans will do with it, because the Germans are panicking, so they rather have that thing on their own hands. But-
Germany will send the turbine immediately. Trust me, they won't pass.
Yeah, so I expect things to change rather quickly once autumn hit. When especially we start to realize that their gas or oil reserves are not hitting the target that they need for winter. I think then I think the shit will hit the fan, and then the riots will start to get worse. I think, and then the politicians will start to panic, because we already have enough quite a number of protests all over the place now, over I think energy price, oil price. I think some is like fertilizer related. So I think this will only get worse because Ukraine is not giving up. So we can expect this conflict to go on for a while. It's just a matter of whether the European support will continue or not. Because even without European support, I believe the Ukrainians on themselves, they will still continue to fight for a while, until a complete collapse of their military. That's my kind of feeling. So, and then they will then Zelensky can start to blame the Europeans. You see, you cause all this death and and destruction. Try to influence through information warfare. But the Europeans themselves, I think the Western Europeans are not able to hold on for very long to the end of the year, because it's mutually destructive, both for Russia and the Western Europe, especially for Germany. I reported on my own headlines. There's a lot of warnings, from the unions, and they are like really worried about this thing.
Alex, go.
I completely agree with Wyatt. I also think that one of the main things that this is the question I always get to from everywhere, left and right, but it depends on the military situation before fall, like before autumn. If depends who wins, because I think the Ukrainians want a major win soon. We always say time is against Russia, maybe, but right now, after the recent weeks, time is against Ukraine because they need a win to guarantee European support through the winter. The winter is coming, the winter is going to be bad. So Europe wants to be confident that if they help Ukraine, they can actually win. So I think the next few weeks are going to be very important, especially for Ukraine that need to reconquer some land, some city, to show confidence in their European partners and even in the US, because in the US there's also other events going on. So this is what we have to see. The next battles are going to be important.
So, perfect. I want, before the next questions, to give the stand to Devruk. So if you can take the mic on to let us know a little bit about the updates about Sri Lanka and the geopolitical position about the US, China, Silk Road, what is happening now about the attack to the government, the situation of the people, and then after your update, we will pass to the other questions. So if the people that is watching the streaming are interested to make questions, put in the comments, and I will give it to the stand. So Devruk, the word is yours.
So Stefano, as you see on news, Sri Lanka is like completely collapsed. There's a crisis. economically, politically, and in all aspects, we are messed up. If you look at Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka's geo positioning is quite important for the West as well as for China, mainly for China, because it's in the epicenter of Chinese Silk and on Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. And China has invested in Sri Lanka, India has invested, so has US and the West. All are interested on the geographic location. However, with the mismanagement by the government of all governments, the economy collapsed. Our foreign reserves were about $9 billion US 2 years ago, and now our foreign reserves have depleted. Actually, it is negative, and we are not in a position to import anything. And the people are very, very violent, frustrated. They are frustrated because of the collapse of the economy, of the mismanagement of the government, and now it's utter chaos. Actually, it's very funny. Even the Ukrainian conflict has a significant impact on our crisis. If you look at our foreign exchange earning streams, number one is tourism, and the topmost tourism was happening with Russia, and number three was Ukrainian, and now both the streams we have lost. Russians are not coming, and also Ukrainians are not coming, and also our second most biggest export is tea. From tea also we are making dollars, and our biggest exporting destination for tea is Russia. That also has collapsed. On top of that, the crude oil prices have also gone up, and with everything, Sri Lanka is now totally bankrupt and messed up, and all the people are getting fired from jobs because employers can't employ them anymore. Inflation is sky high. Central Bank of Sri Lanka says it's about 35% a month, which I don't believe. I think it is double, because say a pack of rice, it was 100 rupees a week ago. We use rupees in Sri Lanka. You have been, Stefano, you have been to Sri Lanka, and after a week it's about 170. Prices are skyrocketing, and it's
like
crazy.
double price in 1 week.
Double price. And on June 9th, people actually got together, opposition, government, all the people got together, and they protested, and they actually stormed Prime Minister's house, and the Prime Minister quit. And then July 9th, a month later, President's house was occupied by the people, and now President's secretariat, President's house, and Prime Minister's official residence is occupied by people. And the President, we can't find him yet. He has promised that he would leave, or he would quit the job tomorrow, because people want them to leave. President and Prime Minister are brothers. The ruling class is a family, but they are democratically elected. That's the point. Since they fought the war against LTT terrorism, they were very, very famous at that point. In 2009, we defeated LTT terrorism, which was a separatist group who wanted a free land and autonomous region. And this family was very, very, very united, and they gave the leadership for the war and got elected. Even at that time, president was elected by people. Subsequently, the economic mismanagement happened, and if I was reading the IMF report, because we have asked for an IMF emergency relief fund, which IMF has rejected. They are asking for more transparency. Likewise, they are highlighting the corruption and the mismanagement that has happened in the country and the government, and now we are in an utter mess. And I don't know what tomorrow would be like. No fuel. Like for me, over a week, I don't have fuel for my vehicle. Even though if I have money in my pocket, there is no essential foods in the supermarket, on the shop. Even though if I have money, there is no medicine. My wife is a doctor, and she says for surgeries, even for suturing, right? You get the word, to put stitches. Even suturing material is not available in the hospitals. Likewise, the health system is also collapsing. Everything is collapsing, and people are trying to migrate, including myself. I feel like I should leave because pointless staying here. Like, I don't see a future at this point. But looking at what happened, I also don't want to leave, because if I leave, if everyone leaves, then this will be left with a bunch of people, like politicians. I mean, people actually mad at all politicians. They keep burning houses of politicians, beating them, and it's crazy. Opposition or government doesn't matter. People hate politicians.
Deborah, I have some question for you. And then, okay. The main question then, if we and Alex want to ask something so from the people. Okay. So, the actual president was pro-West, and the previous was pro-China, as well as only to make like a fact.
The question is, Sri Lanka chose pro-US president and his family, and now collapsed. Nothing new. Actually, Sri Lankan president, the current president, who's going to resign tomorrow, was a citizen of US. He was living in the US. But then again, after becoming the president, he was compelled, and he did work with China, because China has invested a lot. China keeps investing on all projects that we say. I doubt how pro-US he was. Like, being honest, like being unbiased. I don't know. His family is also actually living in the US.
Okay, another question that is connected. Like, it's about the same. If there is like one part that is pro-China, another part pro-US or whatever, if there is this situation of like managing foreign funds to solve the crisis. I received the same, for example, I can show you the question about India. Let's see. I know already the answer that you will give to me, but I will put it to you. Yeah. It's like wait a sec, because I received, okay, this one. So, if Sri Lanka will join India if they pay their debt. I already know your answer, but answer by yourself.
It's funny. Actually, India is our immediate and the closest neighbor. When Sri Lanka got bankrupt, it is India who's lended a credit facility for immediate relief, to buy fuel, to buy medicine. Likewise, I think they have provided about 1.5 billion USD. That is not aid. It is also another loan. Credit as in loan, not aid. And we are also getting into debt even more now. Of course, now our people would be helpless. People were joking when Elon Musk wanted to purchase Twitter. I can't remember the amount. It was some billions, like 7 billion or some amount. So our debt payment at that point was less than the price of Twitter for Elon Musk to purchase. And people were joking, why don't you purchase Sri Lanka by paying the debt? So I don't know what could happen, because our security is at a very bad situation now. Security is chaos, because we are very vulnerable for anything. Any country, any foreign party, anyone could influence us because of our poverty. I mean, our economic crisis. People are hungry. People are starving. It says many people are having like one meal a day. Most people, because of the unemployment and the crisis. It's crazy, because Sri Lanka was never like this before. Crazy.
Alex, if you want to make question, be free, and then after your question, I will check if there is any other question, and we will move to Ukraine.
So I want to share because actually what happened is that I was doing the DPA CSI, which is actually the DPA's country stability index. I was actually updating the one for Sri Lanka. So actually I can share with you. This is I haven't even launched yet. It's not even on the website yet, but I can actually share.
Share
Something.
it. I will put it.
Yeah, no, I share already. So when this is posted, you'll probably see this on the website, and I will be doing a video as well. So Sri Lanka, according to my rating, is actually at the brink of becoming a failed state. It's not yet. It's very, very close. So I have gone through all the different things, like there's this political situation, then society, then economics, whatever, and also of course the GDP growth rate that is actually went negative. The inflation is actually, you are right, it's actually more than that. It's actually 54.6 year on year. This year on year, not month on month yet. Month on month I think is not that high. I think. But it's also very high. It's still stupidly high. So anyway, so the stability index at 0.100 is basically the very brink of being failed state. So actually, if I can show you, yes. So actually, I'm still working on. I was like, this is totally new. So you guys are seeing this for the first time. No one ever saw this. So leadership crisis. Basically, there is the governmental failure because the government actually is not working per se, because there's no way they can work because there's nothing to work on. And then political deadlock because even the oppositions, even they cannot decide who want to be the leader, who should be the leader, right? Then mass civil disobedience because basically the police can't do anything anymore now. Nobody can stop anyone. And then you have a negative GDP growth. This is something new. And there's this warning of this is not entered yet. So if the unemployment numbers is in and is definitely above 10%, then which I suspect might be the case because we haven't get the number, Sri Lanka will go into a failed state because you go below zero. And then fuel crisis, food crisis, energy crisis. There's no enough gold reserve. There's low foreign exchange, high national debt. Currently is above the annual GDP. It still have not passed 2 times, which is unsustainable. But of course, given the number of loans that is going in and out, I have no idea. I've lost track. I haven't seen any articles saying that it's twice or 200% of the annual GDP yet. I suspect. And then I just got this information that the inflation is actually above 25% year on year. So because it's like 50%. So when you add up all the points, it's basically 0.100. It is in crisis because below zero then it's a failed state. So we are very close, very, very close. And the worst thing is that if the political deadlock still do not solve, then we're gonna have a failed state in Sri Lanka, and that's, to be honest, really, really bad. So this just happened to something that I happened just working today on this. Then we happen to talk about this, so I might as well just share it here. Yeah.
You were telling something quite interesting. Now the president is leaving tomorrow. He has signed the resignation letter, and the prime minister's private house was actually fired by people, burnt by people, and people are demanding prime minister to leave as well. And when the media is questioning who's going to be the next president, who's going to be the next prime minister, no one wants to take up the position. It is almost anarchy.
Yeah.
Like people are deciding, like if people decide they want to check a vehicle, people get together, they stop the vehicle and they check if there is a politician. If there's a politician, they beat. Once Communist Party was beaten to death a month ago.
Not a good moment to be a candidate in Sri Lanka.
No.
So no, but as
I have no idea why we are smiling so much. We shouldn't be smiling, man.
But sometimes, in my experience, if you check like the best time of a government of a state like Belgium, you can check it. But I think it was the time where there was no government for 2 years. So we are still in hope that this situation could be better. Well, And I just put this quote for you, so you can see that there is a lot of people that loves Sri Lanka, and then we will move. If Alex want to ask something, but I went in Sri Lanka in 2016. I can prove it that it's an amazing place, amazing people. What it was incredible for me, that it was not, let's say, at all a religious conflict. You can go, for example, in a Buddhist temple. There is also Hindu temple inside the same temple. No problems. Everybody pray what they want. Amazing beaches, whatever. So, for me, it's a pity, because I think that also, but this is another problem where a state is very dependent from one sort of GDP only, as you said. If it's something happening to rice or tea of tourism, you are fucked up. So it's the same. Imagine Italy, it's very dependent by tourism, but it's only, everybody think that it's a lot. It's 12% of our GDP. So it's a lot, but it's not completely dependent. And this is what I think about the situation of a lot of countries that have this problem of not a balance between, for example, import and export, or not, let's say, autonomous about production of things. Now, the situation over the last 20 years, it's very complicated, because nothing is built in one state. It's, if you check one, I don't know, this phone, it's the components, and it's built in 20 states and assembled. So it's not possible anymore to create something that it's autarky during the 20s or the 30s in Europe, where every state tried to build everything by themselves. It's possible for some states, but it's completely, let's say, disconnected from a reality with it's the actual world. It could be 50, 60, 70, 100 years ago, but now it's very difficult and expensive. It's possible, but expensive. Alex, if you have any question or no?
Can I
Okay,
conclude?
Devrok, if you want to say something.
Yeah, the thing is, now we as a state, we are failing, but it is not the politicians or the people in power that really fails. The country is beautiful. People have visited, so many tourists were there, and the majority, or the 22 million of our citizens, they are the ones who suffer. But we have been a part of all, you name the international body, we have been a part of that international body. You say UN, say IMF, or say even with China, say BRI, or say if it is with the US, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, MCC, we were discussing, even though there was no conclusion. However, how connected, even like how well connected, doesn't matter now. We are becoming a failed state. I don't know whether the world should just look and laugh. I don't know. I know the news was funny to see how people were swimming in president's house. Like, funny news were shown, but end of the day, people are suffering at this stage on 21st century, being on a connected, globalized world. The whole world is watching while people are suffering, like innocent people who are not responsible, or who are not shouldn't suffer. But we are in such a state, but billions and billions are spent on war. Now we are talking about Ukraine. US president, or US or EU or NATO, or whatever the power block that you speak or that you name, are spending billions to fight one enemy or to protect one country. I don't know, whatever that you all say, because I'm not very much confident about the topic on Ukraine, as I haven't been much in touch with it. If you look at Sri Lanka, I feel there should be more attention from the international bodies, because people keep dying, people are suffering like for no reason, and that life could be useful for the betterment of the world, because so many educated people are here, so many innocent people are here, but the world is almost blind at this stage. Like, no relief, no help, at least to do some structural changes, or maybe to interfere on our governance, maybe by the United Nations. I don't know, because we have been a part since the beginning, since the inception of UN, like at the beginning. I feel like the world has left out the country, letting people suffer. It's very sad.
Alex, go.
Yeah, I had a question. Do you think with the current instability, do you think that the Tamil Tigers are going to rise up again? Do you think that this could be an opportunity for them to secede by saying, look, Sri Lanka is a failed state or whatever? Do you see some reburning of the situation?
Alex, being honest, all Sri Lankans are suffering at the same level. My hunger is also, like, ethnically we are divided. That's true. Like, being a Muslim or a Tamil or a Sinhala, we all feel the same hunger. I don't think anyone has any energy or any much thoughts to fight for separatism. But if the foreign entities of LTTE is listed as a terrorist group, even in Canada, in Europe, in European Union, in US, it's a banned terrorist group. If they fund, of course, they could easily fire up. That's possible, but I doubt, because people are hungry. People are not interested in creating any states rather than leaving the place to find a better place at this stage. Because people are helpless, including myself. Like, where I'm working, I'm a civil engineer by profession. Even though my master's is in international development, I work as a civil engineer. My name I saw last week on the firing list. So end of August, I am to be fired from the company that I'm working. I don't know where to go. There are no jobs. So the crime rate and conflicts would even go up because people are frustrated.
So thank you, Devruk, for your testimony. I hope that there will be like some international intervention, not by war, but by money. So let's hope. I think that it will be worth it, because I think Sri Lanka deserves to be like a stable nation. It's peaceful people. It's an amazing place. So let's see what will happen soon. But okay, returning back to the previous argument, and then we will see. So about, I received a lot of questions before about Ukraine. Okay, so one was about, there is like some repeating question that we have in the streams. I will give the stand to the panelists. Just for you to know, I repeat to the commenters, I'm moderating very in a poor way. So I'm putting all the question. Please be a little bit moderate with an etiquette. So be cynic, critic, whatever you want. Nobody of us is biased, so we can say whatever we want, and we receive any type of questions. But as I said to you, let's say that my background is very connected also to Russia. I have a lot of information directly from Russia, someone in Russia. So I can say to you something what is happening about the prices that nobody Western and Eastern propaganda will say. I will tell you the same thing. Something that is happening in Sri Lanka, it's happening also in Russia about prices of normal food. So it's what is changing in the people. They are trying to lowering the level of life. So they're not blaming the state. It's something that it's not possible that happen in the West. So if we have high inflation, we will blame the state for the inflation. Russians are very proud, so they only decrease the level of life. So the big there is like in Russia a lot of different type of supermarket with a lot of different type of prices. They will decrease the level of expectation before to blame the state, but we will go later. So same question that for Alex and DPA. Is a Russian mobilization feasible? If not, what goals can Russia achieve with its current military approach?
The Russian cannot mobilize without attack on the mainland or on any of the sister country. Sister is the NATO, the Russian version of NATO. So that is actually inside their constitution. And Putin, being Putin, he actually follows the law as much as he can within Russia. So it's not politically tenable for even Putin, despite he is so-called all-powerful within Russia, to actually just do a mass mobilization. If he do that, then he's going to face the same problem as Zelensky, where all the mobilization is forced, and then people will start to resent, the country will start to fail, and it will affect also economically and all these things. So it's not likely that the Russians will mobilize for no reason, or just so that they can speed up. Because I don't think the Russians' aim is to speed up the war. I don't think the Russians want the war to end so quickly, because they wanted to drag it on all the way to autumn and winter, and then the West start to get pressured, and then they can achieve what they want. They can start to negotiate, to now properly talk. Because now nobody wants to talk to the Russians. Nobody wants to talk to Putin properly. They just want to make a lot of noise and say some chest thumping words, then feel powerful, and then just like the UK's that woman who wants to be the prime minister, say something, she'll continue to support Ukraine and all this kind of thing. This thing will end when they start to suffer, the population starts to suffer, and politically it's not tenable. So I don't think the Russians want to end the war quickly either. And they don't want to, whatever they are having now is sufficient to carry on to fight. They have a proper good system of rotation, troop rotations. They have no pressure, to be honest, although people are still dying. But militarily speaking, they have no pressure. They just slowly grind through. The Ukrainians are just struggling to keep up, even at this slow rate of fighting. Because Putin did mention, I think, that he do not want people to die unnecessarily. So the instruction to the commanders is just to preserve life, which is why they withdraw from Snake Island, which is why they withdraw from the northern front. Because while they can forcefully hold those positions, or even conquer Kiev or Sumy, but it's no point for them to do it, because it's just not worth the life, because that's not their objective to capture all this city for now. So for them, they just want to slowly grind. And like even the way how they conquered Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, they did not actually go head on. They actually do this flanking movement, encirclement, to put pressure on the Ukrainian troops to closing this window, so that they have this panic to should we stay or should we retreat, that kind of situation. And that creates the kind of uncertainty that makes it easier for the Russians to actually conquer all this city. Like the fall of Lysychansk is a surprise. No one expected Lysychansk to fall so quickly. Not even me actually. But they just even fought, they hardly even fought. I don't even think they actually fought in Lysychansk much. They just do a successful tactical retreat operation, and then successfully retreated to Bakhmut and Siversk. So that's how it seems. So given the trend of war, Russia have no need for mobilization, unless something stupid happen. Then we will have another talk then.
I think also Alex didn't expecting like a fastly retreat from Lysychansk from his video. I suppose. But if I can say something to you, just for you to know the main problem from, let's say, Russian people. What I think about the mobilization, I think that if you check about the ethnicity and the let's say the localization of the troops, it's mainly from the eastern part of the federation. It's very difficult to find any death from Moscow and Peter. I repeat this thing. Check in the official death list in the Russian army. And the official list, it's official. Like mainly, it's like high level. You don't find like low level soldier, private. It's impossible to find the official list in Russia. But if you check about the officials and the high level ranks people, you would see that the mostly of them it's from eastern part of Russian Federation. If you will do like a mobilization that include Moscow and Peter, or Ekaterinburg, or still also Rostov, that is next to the border, it will be a problem because, trust me, I will explain how I know it. But people in the cities don't feel the war in Russia. They can see it only by the prices, but it's something far away. If you are in Moscow, you have for sure the propaganda from the TV, but it's something that it's far away. It's not next to. But if you have a mobilization, it's difficult to manage such a stable system if you start a mobilization. As you say, we are in Ukraine. You cannot go out from the country for mail. It's complicated. You cannot defect. What is doing like the Russian Federation state is try to catch as much as possible military from people that is actually inside. For example, FSB or whatever. It's indirect mobbing using the privilege that they have. I can ask to you, you are a member of FSB, you are without child, you have some benefit from the state, pension or apartment, you have to join the army or you will not have the benefits. This is like the real strategy that you have now. It's not like we are not forcing you to come in the military, but if you don't come, you will not have the privilege that you have now from the state. This is like from, let's say, in real person, like telling, not from Twitter, Telegram, or whatever. So, Alex, if you want to answer.
Very, very interesting. If you could send me eventually this official list, that would be very interesting, because I think I might mention it in a future video, and I think I'll shout out to you for the information you said about recruiting from the countryside more, and about the FSB recruiting and everything. This is very interesting. So
Alex, only to say to you, it's something not new. If you check, if you check also in the Second World War, it was preferable to take the people from the East, because also it's not something that it's racist, only to say in advance to prevent any comments or whatever. But let's say that Asian ethnicity of Russians are more, let's say, prepared to war. If you check historically, the best fighters are from Caucasus, like Chechens, and from the Eastern Russia, not from the Western. From the Western, it's more business, more economy or whatever. And so this is a strategy to preserve the economical, let's say, part of the society that it's difficult to manage if you start a mobilization.
But the other thing is that the problem with the big mobilization, like you said, is that the Russians know that trouble starts in St. Petersburg and in Moscow, historically. This is the heart of Russia. If you start taking people from there and make them feel the war, it's going to bring problems. And also, you have to train them. A lot of them are not trained, so it takes 3 months anyway. So even if they start now, most of these men won't even be able to reach the front within 3 months, unless you send them after 3 days of fighting. But there is not much point right now. And like we had said, they like the slow grind and bombard. A mass mobilization would actually cause more problem, like in World War I, where they drafted many people, but that means that the economy goes down. if you're going to take software engineers, businessmen, factory workers, then the economic output, which is already not good, is going to drop a lot more. So they prefer to find another solution. And it's a very interesting way to see war also in how they do it. It's very interesting. But a full mobilization, I know some Russians advocate for it, like Strelkov. But yes, it would bring a lot of men to the front, but it would complicate things at the rear. And we know that in Russian history, it's the rear that how can I say it, that could create a revolution if case may be. So last thing, yeah, so Europeans actually want Russia to go for mobilization and everything because it would weaken their economy. But since they're not doing it, it's problematic for Europe actually.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is this idea in the West, like they are hoping to trick Russia into overcommitting into the war. I kept having this feeling that they are trying to fan up the war situation, and they want Russia to go ahead in, like how the Soviet Union entered Afghanistan, then they just overrun everything. But then once they are there occupying the country, they got smacked by all the Mujahidins. I think that's what they hope to happen, and it really did indeed seems to be a bit of that case when they first rushed all the way to Kiev in the north, but after a while, Russia also realized that is kind of stupid, and that's why they withdrew, and then they go back to the old World War II style of strategic war where they slowly conquer encirclements, the old way of fighting, rather than do the kind of just stupid way of blitzkrieg into Ukraine without the protecting the rear kind of thing. So yeah, but there is always this feeling that they want the Russians to escalate more, which is why they are giving the Ukrainians weapons, but they also didn't want it to expand into a major war. So it's just kind of my feeling. I think that's what you mean, right?
I have like a technical question for you both, and then we will move to the next. But this is very for you because it's about the second resistance that was south of Lysychansk. And there was like if the Ukrainians were able to retreat at all or not, and what is your opinion about it?
This is a very weird thing because I also expected the pocket of resistance, because I was resisting to when the Russians announced the full capture of the whole of Lugansk or Luhansk, depends on which version you want to call it. But I refused to remove that blob of blue there. But after a while, I realized that there's totally no reports of fighting. Like they say some skirmishes, but there's no real fighting like how we witnessed Mariupol. When they declared the liberation of Mariupol, there's actually still heavy fighting at the Azovstal area, but there is not this case in Lysychansk. And I was kind of like forced to just close it because it started to look a bit stupid to leave it there, where everybody else is start to just paint it all red, and then there's no news coming out from the area. So, and what is the surprising thing is that there is also no reports of mass captures or mass surrenders at Lysychansk. So I get this feeling that the Ukrainians did indeed have a very good withdrawal, and whoever that is left behind are probably really well-trained soldiers that are able to escape tactically out of that area. But that is kind of my sensing, because it's unusual to have like the Russians announced that the Ukrainians are trapped in the encirclement at the south, but they captured like almost nobody. So that is very unusual.
Yeah, and I also think that there was also an incentive to let the people go out. In my opinion, I feel that there's an incentive to let the Ukrainian soldiers withdraw because if you close the cauldron and for an encirclement, then you have a Mariupol, and it's going to last 2 months. The fighting is going to last a lot, and this is what I think is what Ukraine wanted. Perhaps Zelensky, this is what he wanted, to have a last stand that lasts a long time for the Russians to lose time and a lot of resources. But since they all left, it was easier for the Russians, I feel, and since the Russians don't have enough men, a lot of Ukrainians managed to go through Russian lines too in small groups. It's very hard to pinpoint and stop them. So the withdrawal was made, but I don't think that the Russians also interfered much in that attempt.
Yeah, I think they only wanted to take out all the heavy equipment, the vehicles, the armor. They don't want to allow these heavy equipments to leave, or even even trucks and stuff. But they seem to allow the soldiers to just run back, that kind of thing. But that is just my feeling when I observing all the different intelligence and informations all around. Of course, I do not know the truth, but that seems to be the case, because it's very unusual that they say that they close the encirclement and then they catches nobody. So that's kind of weird to me.
And also, what I said in my video is that if you let thousands and thousands of men retreat, it kind of contaminates other units with bad news of saying, oh, we retreated from the fortress, from the impregnable cities. And this is what we've seen a lot historically. When soldiers retreat, they talk with their families, they talk with other units, and they say, yeah, it was a catastrophe there, it was chaos, we didn't have anything. And it kind of contaminates the morale of other troops.
Yeah, good point. I think there is a video of some troops that met with their officers, that they retreated, and then they met, and then they started to curse and scold their officer that you left us behind, and then that kind of thing. I saw the video, but I can't understand Ukrainian. But no, that's the caption of what they wrote. They said that they were really, really angry that they got left behind by the officers, and probably the officers are surprised that they're still alive, that sort of thing. So I think that might be, have some basis.
So, next questions. Does the panel think that the European Union army proposal is possible to become a reality without American interfering? Let me say the short answer. For me, it's impossible. European army, it's an impossible agreement at the moment, because we are not a United States of America. If you check about, if I can say to you in advance, like for example, Hilde that started this panel, she was my teacher 10 years ago in a program in Oslo. She is the best expert that I know about the US foreign policy, but she's not a pro-US. So she's telling about, let's say, the point of view that is about the US foreign policy. As she said, we have to divide what is like, for example, US and NATO. It's not the same. Second, not all the things that do US, it's good or bad. And all the big powers in the world do bad things. So nothing is innocent with the great powers, because everybody do their own interest. Point. If you check this thing, this is the main problem about the European Union. Let's say European army, not European Union, because there is not an army. If you check to the US case, the only two things that you have in common of the 50 US states, it's like the monetary politics and the currency, dollar, and the foreign policy and army. Nothing else in common. All the 50 US states have different laws, different everything. So if you check Europe, it's completely different. First, we are, for example, mismatching Europe and Eurozone. It's two different things. We have 27 states in Europe, 17 in Europe. So it's different. We don't have a currency in common. we have a lot of interests that are like in conflict. The interest of France, it's not with the interest of Germany and Italy. So it's very difficult to manage like a common interest in army. Everybody have their own army and whatever. NATO, in this case, at the example of Libya that was asked, I can prove you in anything that you want that Italy was completely against the war in Libya, completely 100%, but we had to give to NATO the bases in Sicily. So it was not a choice, but we were against because actually we had a lot of problem about immigrants. There is no control. The states, it's disaster. It's divided in two, whatever. So what I can say to you is that in my point of view, the problem of the European Union army or Europe army, it's very long-term thing. It's technically the US interference. It's interesting because NATO, it's not for sure US, it's the first big member. Second member, I'm sure that only Alex, DPA, and some members of the group knows, but it's not France, it's not Germany, it's not Italy. The second biggest member in NATO is Turkey. So about the most powerful army. So it's something that is mismatched. It's not an European thing. Turkey, it's not in Europe. So if let's say like Alex, your opinion about it, and also
it's funny because this is gonna be the topic of my next video on YouTube, and it's kind of a spoiler, but the idea of a European Union army is very interesting because when you look on paper, the strength, they're actually stronger than Russia. When you look on paper, they're very strong. And in many counter arguments, whether it's language or anything, I don't see problems. However, the big problem is what you mentioned. It is the different interests, of course, but above all, the big problem is who would be in charge. Because if it's France, a lot of countries, I'll tell you all the countries that don't want France to be in charge. It's all European Union except France. I'll tell you the list of all the countries that don't want Germany to be in charge. Everyone except Germany. And it's the same for every country. So there's no real leader. And for example, like you said, Italians got kicked out of Libya by the French oil companies. They don't like it. And if France is the leader, they will do that more and more. So the problem of a European army is who would be in charge. And the problem in Europe is that even if France has the biggest army, they're not so much bigger and so much richer that they can impose their will. And that's why NATO works, because the US is so much bigger and so much stronger than every individual state. So they can apply their force anywhere. And I think that's one of the big problems of a EU army. However, we see that maybe not all European Union, but perhaps a smaller circle of European integration could happen. And it's already in the process. For example, Italy, France, Benelux, and Germany, they're coordinating more and more military equipment. For example, the communications of Western European armies is going to be ESOR from Italy. The new armored vehicle is going to be from Italy. The tank is going to be France, Germany. But all these countries are sharing aircraft, helicopters, tanks, ammunition, weapons, everything. So they're more and more together because they know that Germany alone or France alone, they can't have the power in the world to change anything when you have countries like Indonesia with 200 million people. France only has 65 million. And with the growing population in the world, the individual European countries cannot have their say. So they have no other choice to regroup. So I don't think that a big Eurozone army could work because of all the different interests. But a smaller circle, maybe.
I think
As you said, only to put an example with, it's about, for example, we have already a lot of integration about, for example, Eurofighter project. It's already made by an European consortium. Also, it's something that is more complicated, but we had to say to me last time about, for example, Singapore and US and agreements about F-35. F-35, it's another example. It's with US also, for example, the wings of F-35, it's made in Italy. So we are not creating the plane in one country, but any country that it's part of a consortium is making one part. And it's the same thing about the interconnection that was made for the Czech and the European Union. Such a kind to don't create a war and an agreement, because it's more, let's say that it hurts more to make a fight with neighbors than to be in peace. Not because we like the French people or the Spanish or the Germans, but it's because economically, for example, it's less expensive to make Eurofighter than the Assault Rafale, because the technology is shared, the expenses are shared. It's like for example, that Boeing, it's more expensive than Airbus, because Airbus, it's a consortium between France and Germany. So but it's difficult to make agreement in Europe, because the problem, it's all the entities in Europe, it's made by you need an unanimous vote. It's not a majority. This is the huge problem of European Union. If Hungary or a stupid state, minimal like Luxembourg, but I like a lot Luxembourg, it's the richest state in the world, but it means nothing in population, say no, it doesn't pass. So it's something that imagine for this thing that it's very funny, and it's the word is yours. We were sending from Campania like 3 pieces of artillery to Ukraine, but like stupid stuff. Don't think HIMARS or whatever, very basic stuff. We were unable to pass it because they didn't have the documents of transportation. So it's only a stupid example. So if you want to move something from Vladivostok to Donbass, you do it, because there is not, let's say, democratic control of the situation. We have a lot of democracy, but it's very slow, everything, processes, agreement, everything or whatever. So
Yeah, so actually, I was also about to talk about how the EU's problem with the veto system is just like the Security Council in the UN. Anyone just veto, then the whole thing just collapse. So which makes EU army extremely hard to deploy. That means you have a EU army that you cannot use, because there will be someone that can be influenced or bought over by a foreign power, and then it would just like break the whole thing. It's just like how Turkey, Turkey and inside NATO, they just like hijack the entire NATO. They don't allow Finland and Sweden to get in unless they get something in return, and that just made it worse when it's EU, because you got a lot more tiny countries that have too much power vis-a-vis their population. Then it makes no sense. So the another problem is equipment as well. EU army, I think the Europeans use a lot of American stuff, so that makes it really hard for the Americans to just agree. I think it's a very attractive idea. I think the Europeans, really want to have this pride to have their own army and not depend on the Americans. But I think how all the weapons, I just don't think it's doable.
But I think okay, one before this.
Alex, go. I only prevent for the question, but say what you want.
I think with the previous topic about NATO, since NATO goes more and more into the Pacific, they might leave Europe behind a bit, and that's the problem. NATO is everywhere on the planet, and Europeans maybe might feel left aside eventually. So the idea of a EU army is not so crazy. People have been talking about it for a long time. like I said, is just maybe not the entire Eurozone, for example, because they have different interests. And we might be in a situation like Austria-Hungary, which was a big mess. It was on paper beautiful, and in reality, it didn't work out.
Alex, before this question, that it's dedicated to you both, because I know nothing about bridges, only Cicciacca, so Severodona, so it's your field. If I can give you up one provocation, I think that the biggest issue about the European army, it's still the US. Think about it, and I think it's still... I'm not saying US is bad, good, I don't care. But think about that Germany and Italy lost the Second World War. So I'm not saying that we are still occupied, but we are the best allied of the US. Germany. It's like the losers in the Second World War are the best allied of the US. For example, Japan, Italy, and Germany. Check it. And you can see, for example, US, the biggest base in the world, you have in South Korea for the problem of Korea, Okinawa, Italy, and Germany. If you go like in southern Italy, there is the biggest base, naval base of NATO. It's in Naples. In Germany, you have Air Force and whatever. The main problem is that actually the only European countries that have, for example, nukes officially are France and the UK, but unofficially it's fake. I'm in Brescia. You can check my city on the map. It's between Verona and Milan. 20 minutes by car from my home, there is 40 nuclear bombs. But it's technically NATO. It's not Italian. So it's hosted by Italy. There is in Netherlands, in Benelux. There is in Germany. So there is this thing that after the Second World War, we, let's say, ceded part of our security against the Soviet Union with the control of the US army. Because in these bases, technically it's like NATO bases, but it's not US bases. This is important. In Italy, we have US base. For example, we have Vicenza, where we have 15,000 US troops. We have in Pisa, Camp Derby, but these bases are not technically US bases, are the common. For example, this base is Turkish, Italy, and US. There is NATO bombs. We don't know, for example, when there was like the coup, the coup in Turkey in 2016 about Erdogan. Probably the US wasn't trusted in a trusting mode with Turkey, and probably they moved nukes from NATO bases in Turkey to Italy. Nobody is sure, but probably. So the problem is this one. We have not nuclear plants. Germany is closing it. So the nuclear deterrent in Europe, it's technically US. It's not European, except for France and UK. But you have to check that France historically, Alex, it's not so NATO. It was out of NATO for 20 years. So it's France. It's the only state that it's not every time allied with the US. This is why, for example, it was like this temptation of Macron to make the deal with Putin, and it didn't happen. And now I think that who will make the deal? It's Erdogan, it's Turkey, it's not Europe anymore. Let's see, but I'm sure that the deal will be made in Istanbul or Ankara, not in Paris or Minsk. So, technical question for you both about the bridges. If you have any news about it, if they recover some bridges that were blown.
Nah, no, I never see anything about the bridges. But you can just assume that it will be repaired. You can just assume that.
Yeah, same thing. There's no real information. And I feel in the past few days, there's even less information overall. I don't know if it's because a lot of the people reporting are on vacation, but in the last few days, it's also why I didn't do any Ukraine update. hasn't been much going on, even in news or anything. So we don't know.
Yeah, I went over to Indonesia and came back for 3 days. I didn't have time to like do any updates, and then when I do the summary, it's still 40 minutes. There's nothing. No, there's really no. It's almost like as if I just do a 1 day update. No, I think the Russians are having an operational pause. I think this is probably in line with what Putin has requested or ordered the chief of this army to do, to just give the forces a pause.
Okay, so like to maintain like one format that is good, don't make it 3 hours and half like the last one. We'll put the last two questions, so we'll leave everybody to maintain a format that could be appraisable. So about technically, do you think that Ukrainian officers are following NATO doctrine and placing officers behind the front lines, and this is causing resentment? Soviets put officer at the front line. If I can put another of this question, a lot of military interpretation about what you both were asking in the Western media, but Western military specialized, not mainstream. They were saying that this tactic of retreat, especially Lysychansk, was like NATO doctrine to, let's say, change a little bit the Ukrainian military mindset from the Soviet, let's say, mindset to never retreat. So this is like something that it will be useful to understand.
Well, I had a discussion with some foreign volunteers. They send me emails. For some reason, they like to message me in private. But from everything I learned is that the Ukrainian army is very much a Soviet army with a NATO hat. So this is the biggest problem, is that yes, the NATO trained the Ukrainian army, but when you see how they act and react, and it's very Soviet the way everything is going, and the training has not been the best. So that's why Britain has said, you send us the soldier in Britain and we are going to train them. The training is not going to take place in Ukraine, but they're ready to take the soldiers, bring them to England for NATO training. The problem is that it's late in the war and it's going to take some time. Yeah.
And it's only just 1 month, the training.
Yeah, exactly.
That is pointless. 1 month, you can't do much. I went through basic military training for 3 months. I went out, passed out of, to get my private, and I still feel like an idiot. So I don't think 1 month of training will do much difference. I mean, when I finished my basic military training, my feeling was that, oh God, I'm going to be a cannon fodder. That's all I know. Because all we learn is how to react when you got ambushed. Basically, you just charge at the enemy. That's basically the doctrine. Because if you're ambushed, you're going to be dead. So the doctrine is like, once you got ambushed, you just charge at the enemy in the whatever direction the bullet is coming. Just charge, because otherwise you're going to be dead. So when I pass out of my basic military training, my feeling is that I'm going to be dead if there's a war. And now we are hearing from Ukraine training only for 2 weeks or 1 month. These people are just going to die. They're just going there to die, unfortunately.
But from what I've seen, and in the light of what you said, I think the training, the emphasis is on specialist technical weapons, for example, artillery and everything. Now that you talked about it, 1 month, I don't see how they could train infantry in that time. However, most of the images we see is technicians somehow.
I'm not even sure you can train someone to use Microsoft Word in 1 month sometimes.
So I have a last technical question, and then we will make the conclusion. Like for anybody, I collected a lot of questions, so I will prepare the next panel will be the same format. So speaker plus panel. This is DPA. It's a question for you.
Yeah, the Russians cannot shoot at any Western drones, not just US. Like any Western drones, they cannot shoot it down, provided that the drones also do not stray into Russian controlled airspace. provided that, because once they go in, there is a legitimacy for the Russians to actually shoot it down, and the Russians may actually shoot it down. But the Americans are very careful. I think the NATO forces are also very careful. They are not going to stray into Russian airspace nor Ukrainian airspace, but they will not dare to shoot down a drone that is not within their airspace, because that is a declaration of war in a way. So not a good idea.
Okay, so
I agree. So yeah.
Alex, okay, so you agree also. Okay, I have some technical question about fertilizer or whatever. I have one follower of the last streaming that sent a lot of questions, but only like to this follower express mainly the question about the intervention or not in the war directly about Belarus. So what is your opinion if there is a chance that there is like a joint venture between like the Belarus army and Russian army from the north?
I made a video about it a long time, but the Belarusian army is in no way right now. I don't feel that they could attack. I think they like to put pressure just to put pressure on Ukraine, but it's clear that they don't want to enter, because Belarus also had political problems. So the army is like a police, is more a police than a military. So they need it for internal security. So if they send it to war, it's going to be problematic for the central government. And also it could escalate the war. Like if another country joins in, then Poland can come in, and then it's complicated. So I don't see it.
Yeah, I think the role of Belarus now is just as a deterrence, so to prevent Poland to get into Ukraine. So that's all I see the drop of Belarus. While the Ukrainians, from as long as I can remember, in their operational information, they are always warning about an invasion by Belarus. Like from the first week, they have been talking about Belarus invading Ukraine, and then it never happens. And then after a while, I started like, this is never going to happen. And then indeed, until today, they are still talking about Belarus is preparing to invade Ukraine, but it never happens. So, but Belarus did, the Lukashenko did say that if Poland enters Ukraine militarily, Belarus will invade to stop Poland. So I think that is rather clear. And then that's the red line, which is Poland kind of like took very seriously.
I agree with you both, but I can be sure that Poland will not enter in the war. But mainly because it's the same problem. NATO will not intervene in this one because it's too dangerous. There is no real issue that it's in the national interest. I don't want to be, let's say, bad in this situation, but European Union is supporting Ukraine, but the problem is that when we will have the main damage about the economy, it will come soon. It will be difficult to maintain this pro-Ukrainian mood in the people. Because at the beginning it's easy, but when you're in Italy now, you have the inflation that it's about 8%. It's the biggest from the late 70s. So because we are not let's say able to understand what is like the high prices. I can tell you, I saw, for example, in South America or whatever, where the salaries are 3 times less than in Italy. The food is more expensive. So the wine is, or also, for example, Alex, I saw in US 1 bottle of water in supermarket. The worst water that you can buy was $1.5. In Italy, it's 20 cents, 30 cents. Wine, it's $1.5 if you want in Italy. So I think that the situation militarily, you took the point of everybody. I think that we agree at all that Russia is not pushing to make it faster. In my point of view, Ukraine will try, but as I saw in all your presentation and also military summer war in Ukraine, all the other our presenter will try to catch some results in the south, in my opinion, because they need something to make a deal at the table. We need to reach this situation when it's with the right time to deal with Russia. And if you are losing, it's more difficult to deal. It's sad to say, but nobody cares about lives of civilians, and they want to reach a point where the line it's profitable to make a right deal. Ukrainian cannot lose the access to the sea. I think that you can agree about it, because Ukraine without sea, it's a failed state. It's already failed state without the support of the European Union, but without the sea, it's completely failed. And if Russia can take Donbass, Alex know it, DPA know it, that the official Russian propaganda before the war was to arrive to Transnistria. It was fake. That was Donbass and Crimea. It was like to take all the south minimum and make let's say a puppet government in Kiev. And this was the real deal at the beginning. But officially, no. Officially, as you know, both, it was like denazification, demilitarization, recognition of Crimea and Donbass and Lugansk. Lugansk is made. Crimea, nobody will take it. And Donetsk, in your point of view, how much could take to take the rest part of Donbass? This is like the question that I wanted to give to you to close it. Militarily, how much time Russia can need with the actual forces on field?
That's the golden question, and this is the answer that everybody's waiting for. I think right now the Russian army is trying to probe Ukrainian defenses. I always look at WIAT's map on DPA to look at little attacks here and there, but it seems that they're probing. They don't know exactly where they want to attack. I feel they want to repeat the scenario of Lysychansk. That means that an attack that will force Ukrainian forces to abandon the city. So that gives us a hint, but I feel they're probing right now. They want to make a push. I feel, again, it's my opinion, but they don't want to constantly attack because they lose many men. I think they're going to probe, put their forces, attack, and do like at Lysychansk, where remember, in 7 days, it all collapsed. Now, there's a lot of cities in Donbass. Donbass is really full of factories. We know that Ukrainians love to defend in factories because it's indestructible. There's a lot of urban areas. After Donbass, it's fields. So it's going to be tough. Urban areas, a lot of factories, it's going to take some time.
I made a prediction on Twitter saying that by the end of July. So, and the Russia decided to go and rest and sleep. So, I'm not sure how I'm going to fulfill my prediction. Maybe they will have to give myself another 15 days, because I agree. I don't think the Russians are going to go head on, to bash into the cities, especially Sloviansk or Kramatorsk, because those are big cities. It's like Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. I don't think the Russians are going to bash through, which is why I always repeated on my stream. From time to time, I actually do say that the target would be I forgot what is that town. Never mind. One of the town to the west of Sloviansk, which Bavinkov. So that is the likely target, because that is a hub. That's a transport hub. Once you can capture that, you break the northern resupply route entirely, and then that will panic the entire Kramatorsk-Sloviansk area. So, and then because the heavy fortifications are all in the south, so the northern part, no matter how much they want to entrench, it's not going to be as strong as the ones that are in the south. So the Russians are likely to go from the north, which is what the Russians did also. After they break through Popasna, there's not much defenses left, the heavy fortifications, which is why they can go up north rather fast. Although they only trapped by natural terrains where it's much more harder to overcome. So that's what I noticed, which is why then when they attack Lysychans, they don't cross the river from Severodonetsk. They go from the south, from behind, from the back, from the rear they attack. What? You just cut in. You don't have to raise your hand.
Alex, you can take the word whenever.
Yeah, you're too polite.
No, I know, but I don't
it's Canadian polite behavior.
I don't like to cut. Like when you have a good speech, I hate cutting off people. So when you're
it's
in a
okay,
good...
no problem, no problem. Emotional damage to me, no problem. It's normal. I'm Asian.
But it's interesting that we also assume that it's Russia that's going to attack, and nobody actually thinks that Ukraine is going to counterattack. So it's also interesting that in most people's mind, Ukraine is in a 100% defensive position now, and the momentum, it's more the Russian army who's in control of the operations. And that's also interesting in the bigger scheme, because if Russia is in control, how can Ukraine win the decisive battle that they want to win by the end of the summer? So that's the big question.
Yes, I think that you catch the point. But as I repeated before, I think that everybody needs to save the face in their own country. So something that I would give immediately. Wait 1 second. Now, what I wanted to say is that if let's say Ukrainian will have some, in my opinion, victories could be Zaporizhia and Kherson, not the east, because the problem is that I'm not saying that East is already fallen, but in my opinion, it's as you both say, the Russians had a lot of losses. Also, Ukrainian had a lot of losses. Maybe it's not sustainable anymore to fake the list of the death, because the problem is when people start to talk, families or whatever. So it's not technically sustainable also for a long time to maintain high losses on field for both parts. But if you check a lot of Russian propaganda, but when I say propaganda, I'm not saying in a bad way. Russian TV, it's like, as I said, Western propaganda is the same. They are afraid of what Ukrainian can do with the mass mobilization of this magic number, 1 million military soldiers, blah blah blah. I'm not like agreeing with this, because as you said, it's impossible to train a lot of people in so short time. But in another point of view, for Russians it will be difficult to exchange a lot of soldiers died with no mobilization. So it's easier to save and use a lot of artillery. And you both knows and said every time, this war will be remembered for artillery, not for the rest. And the Russia has all the artillery that you want to use for the next 10 years. And it was a problem for our supplies, because our I said Western, it's different caliber, it's difficult to replace Western caliber. We need to take it from South Korea, for example, or whatever. It's not easy to catch it. And as Eric and Tanks said the last stream, if you remember, we are sending like Caesars or other artillery without the last electronical upgrades, because the Western countries are afraid that Russian can catch it and copy it and whatever. So wait, if you want to conclude, we catch the time and
I just want to add one thing about the Russians, why they want to drag on the war and do attack so slowly. It's always like every 2 weeks they will just do one offensive. Then they start to like rest and just do bombardments, because they understand the Western news cycle, because it's getting very boring. You see, the Ukraine war is not as exciting as in the first few months. Then now it's like You see, like I say, I wasn't able to do the updates for 3 days, and end up my update is as good as there's no update because nothing really changed. The entire front line is rather stagnant. There is just bombardments and airstrikes and air-to-air battles. There is no captures of towns, or this little bit, but I can't even verify if that's true. It's very slow, and I think there might be a purpose to that, is to deliberately bore the audience so that there won't be any more popular support for Ukraine war. It will slowly degrade into an Afghanistan war, Iraq war, Syrian war, where people just forget about it. They just thought it's something that happened in Ukraine. That's it. Nobody cares, and that's why also Zelensky and his leadership is that they're trying very hard to do more publicity. They have to force a landing on Snake Island, take the publicity photos. They have to now. The latest one is they launch a missile strike on the Nova Kakhovka water, the dammed area, the power plant, because they just need something to be on the media again, so that something is reported, then people remember that hey, there's still a war in Ukraine, which is very similar to what North Korea like to do. They always send missile strikes. Every time people forget about North Korea, they're like, yeah, we're gonna fire a missile strike, or they fire some artillery to the sea, so that people remember North Korea. It's not because they want to do testing. It's a waste of their money. They are very poor, but it's like this is the only way to get publicity, so that they can then threaten the world again, so that they can get more aids. Yeah,
you're right.
Ukraine is coming back to North Korea.
In the Western media, like I can say it in Italy, but for example, in US, it's already, I don't know, third, 4, 5 news. It's not in the top 3, Ukraine. Like it's very far away. Southern Europe, I think that now it's second and third. It's not anymore first. So you're completely right. This is why I agree with you that it's like of degrading in a slow motion style. But if we can conclude, and Alex said, winter is coming. I think that the worst enemy of this war will be the winter and the gas problem. So it's sad, but practically, I think that all the power will push to a deal, because it will be Germany. I think they will not be happy to use cold water in the showers, and it's Germany. It's not to say bad thing about, for example, Sri Lanka, but Sri Lanka, it's hot. So they can do like ice shower, but Germany, trust me, it's very cold. So
come to Singapore to holiday. We need more tourism money.
The cold depends.
Pandemic is
what?
This is Sri Lanka, and give us some
but
Germany is
Singapore,
hot for Canada. Germany is hot.
Okay. No, but Singapore, I think about tourism, and you are one of the best spot for like the airport of Singapore. I think it's one of the best in the world, also for transfer. So like to conclude this panel, thank for everybody that stayed. Also this panel, we had like an average of over 100 people for 2 hours and a half. So thank for all the viewers. Also we will share all the panels in YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, anything. The next panel will be with a presentation probably of Alex. So we will update you via our channel to promote everybody. Stay on the channel of DPA, but you don't need any publicity or commercial. But you didn't say Defense Politics Asia in this stream. Your fun will be
hello everyone, this is Defense Politics Asia.
Okay,
and please subscribe, because Stefano did a lot of work. A lot more is going to come, so you have to subscribe and press the bell button, like really.
To also History Legend, we are to Defense Politics Asia. The next streaming will be very interesting. Any stream will be with a new speech with question and answer. We saw that this panel is well appreciated. The suggestion was made by Wyatt, and so we agree, and it was a very good suggestion. So thank you all, and let's see you soon. Ciao.